Hey everyone. Thank you for joining us for the February session of our Fabric Data Days monthly series. My name is Anna. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenters and moderators to answer. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our presenters for today. Greg and Heidi, thank you so much for joining.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Coding Languages. Welcome to the Fabric Data Monthly. Apologise, I was a bit delayed there. My screen's been going on and off here in Australia. My name's Heidi Hastings. Today we're going to talk all about coding languages, and we're going to contain it to just the ones that are available in Fabric, because if we went for all the ones in the world, we'd be here for forever and a day. This series would be a lifelong one. It is a lifelong learning experience with the Fabric Data Days. A little bit about me. I am a data analytics professional working for a global consulting company. I am one of the data platform MVPs, love and specializing in Microsoft Fabric, SaaS platform, all in one, the OneDrive for all our data. I also loved being a certified trainer, getting a chance to teach and learn and share with everyone around the world. Been working with tech since, 2005, I think was my first IT job. And I couldn't be happier to be presenting here today with the fabulous Dr. Greg Lowe. How about yourself, Greg?
Hey, Heidi. Morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening or wherever you are. So I'm Greg. So again, a data platform MVP. I'm also part of the Microsoft Regional Director program that I normally describe as just getting me on a whole lot of interesting mailing lists inside Microsoft. So it's all good. I've put social contact there, so don't be a stranger, effectively. And listen, we're not the only ones. We have some awesome moderators today. So we've got Armando, who I've done sessions with in the past along the way, and Kevin Arnold. And so, look, both of those are available in the chat, and hey, make them work. Get them to do things. That'd be great, because we'd love to hear who you are and the usual things. If you're connecting in the chat, let us know where you're from as well. That'd be really good. And so this is one of the Fabric Data Days sessions. And so, look, we've had good feedback from these. And so we want you to be involved in more of them as time goes on. And so, look, we've popped a QR code there on the screen so you can grab that. And then that'll give you an idea when these sessions are going to occur. Another thing I want to mention is the Fabric user panel. And so think about whether you want to be part of this. And so do you look at a screen in Fabric and you think, I wish I could change that? Or do you really want to give direct feedback to product group members? I do a lot of these, and I've found them to be really interesting. And it's an area where sometimes when the product group is thinking about building new things in the product, you can't talk about it. It'll be an NDA thing, but you often get to have a look at what they're thinking long before it ends up in the product. And that's a really powerful point, because that's where you can make a difference, is before things really, really start getting done. And so all you do is sign up for the user panel. I'll send you invites. Generally, you get an invite that then asks you a few questions to work out if you're appropriate for the particular panel. And then once you do that, you get a calendar, and it's not at any particular time. They have lots of times available, and you just sign yourself up to do one of those things. And look, we do have an option for getting you certified as well. So DP 600 and 700, both exams I know intimately well, and they're good, solid exams. These are not trivial exams to do, but if you prepare yourself well, they're really, really good things to be involved with. And again, QR code there. There's a chance to request a voucher. You'd have to take the exam in the next month if you do that. And there's also a limited number of vouchers too. But look, hop onto the site and grab yourself a voucher. And Heidi, tell us about FabCon, because I know you're going and I wish I was.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now it's FabCon and SQLCon. For those of you from the SQL family, you've been playing with SQL Server, Azure SQL, Azure SQL MI, you can come to FabCon too, because there's specialist tracks for SQL. This is the premier conference of the year. It's run in 2 regions at the moment, USA and Europe. This is only its third year. This is only its 3rd year, and already we're seeing like 6,000 attendees. So come to Atlanta, Georgia in the US. I will be flying over from Australia. I'm super excited to be delivering a real-time intelligence workshop talking about event-driven architectures with Minnie from Microsoft, and go to the general session that I'm doing around Fabric governance. But there are so many sessions. There's a session for everyone. They're not recorded, so it's important to go see them in person. If you haven't already got your ticket, make sure you use these voucher codes. 200, pretty sure that's 200 USD off. If you can't make this one, consider going to FabCon in Europe. It's in Spain, Barcelona, a little bit later in the year. And that's another opportunity to connect with not only the community and fellow data professionals, or those of you who are aspiring to be data professionals, but also meet the product team, the people behind the products you're working with. And by the way, they are okay with good, bad, and, unexpected behavior feedback. So don't be afraid to say, hey, look, I would really like this in the product, or hey, look, this doesn't work very well. We're experiencing some issues. They need to know what's good and what's bad so that they can build better products for us as the end users. So definitely get along to that if you can. If you can't make it this year, get yourself prepared to try and justify to the company to send you along next year as a training and development. It's a week of awesome content, 200 plus sessions. You can't go wrong there. It's absolutely cool. But today we're going to dazzle you. We're going to talk about coding languages. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly in the coding space. Now, when we talk about that, what we're going to cover? We're going to cover some of the common languages. We're going to talk about 5 specifically in that space. So we've got SQL or SQL, Python, KQL. KQL is kind of like the little forgotten one in the background. For those of you who've never heard of it, think real-time intelligence. That's where KQL fits in. So it's important to know that, especially if you're going for DP 700. Scala, M, and DAX. Yeah, this is the thing we're going to talk about today. And we'll mention a little bit of AI. Can't get away with not mentioning AI. We are live and interactive. So as Greg said, we got moderators in the chat. We got the awesome producer, Anna. We've also got Pam, otherwise known as Pam in the chat there, helping us out. So please ask your questions. And if you think of something later, reach out to us on socials, join the Fabric community and ask it on the forums there. Someone will be happy to help you. Now we're going to talk about the crew. Now, that's not the crew as in us. You already know us. It's the crew as in the languages that we're going to work with. So we're going to kick it off with probably the superstar of the arena, the tried and tested, works in multiple products. That's the cool thing about it, the SQL or SQL. Tell us about that, Greg.
Awesome. So SQL is probably where I've spent most of my life in the last couple of decades, and it's been a really, really good thing to be involved with. The thing that's interesting with SQL is if you look at where it came from, I've been around this industry a long time, and there was a time in the 70s and 80s where if you had any sort of database, every single database had its own language. And people started saying, hey, wouldn't it be really good if there was a common way to get information out of the different databases, no matter what they were? Because otherwise, you had to learn all these different languages to be able to get things. And really, that's where SQL came from. And so it's ended up being a real, mentions here, a superpower. I can't tell you how many times since the 90s, though, I keep hearing that SQL will end up dying and it'll be replaced by something else. And yet every single new product that comes out ends up with a SQL interface attached to it. And so this is just a core skill. And if you look even in Fabric, we have a whole lot of different areas where SQL applies. So you have standard sort of database type things in both the warehouse and in Fabric SQL database. But then you have things like there's the SQL that lives inside Spark. that we can use when we're working with those areas. So we have SQL queries we can run against KQL databases, which we'll talk about later, and more. It's every single thing ends up with some sort of SQL interface. Now, beyond what SQL started with, it's then ended up growing into the ability to do all sorts of things. So instead of just querying the database, the structured query language bit, it ended up having to sort of grow to support lots of other stuff. And so SQL's got a bunch of different types of statements. Unlike most of the other languages, it's actually got a strong set of variants of the different language. And so first up, there's what we call DDL, or data definition language. And so this is letting us define things. And so you'll find it has words like create or alter or drop. And so, as I said, this used to be done with other stuff that wasn't part of the SQL language. And of course, we have the ability to query it, and so formally called DQL, or data query language. But this is where we write queries. So we say, what do we want to query? We've got where it's coming from, how we're filtering it, how we're ordering the output, and more. But the language doesn't stop there. So we have the ability to modify things. And so data manipulation language is changing data. So update a table, set a value for a particular sales order, and so on. But even that doesn't stop there, because we then have to secure things. And so we have DCL, so data control language, says, how do we control access to the data? And so I can say grant, select and execute on a schema, like all the things that are in this schema, to a particular user, and so on. And in addition to that, we have the ability to do transactional stuff. So they talk about transaction control language. And this is the stuff that makes sure that money that comes out of one account does go into the other account, rather than just disappearing into the ether. And so SQL's got lots of strengths. It's set-based. Mentioned it's declarative querying, so we write as statements how we're doing the query. It's really big on schema and data integrity, and the engines that run SQL are really mature. So they're well optimized, the query engines are good, but of course it works best with structured relational type data, and of course, mentioned here, widely understood and portable. Now, there are some weaknesses. So if you've got unstructured content, like, I don't know, a Word document or something like that, it's not going to cope well with that sort of thing. And sometimes the logic can be complex. And if you go to change things around, then you're typically needing to make schema changes rather than having that happen on the fly. And of course, it's got limited but improving support for probabilistic things or fuzzy logic. So can we do AI predictions? Can we do fuzzy lookups? Things like that. It's a very powerful language. And the one thing I'll finish on with SQL is just how you say the name, because I noticed Heidi said SQL or SQL, right? And so if you look at the purists, they'll all say it's SQL. That's the standard. But if you look at the Microsoft ecosystem, everyone says SQL. Okay, so tell us about KQL though, Heidi.
Oh, it's crazy, these language pronunciations, isn't it? And then we got USQL, but we're not doing that one today. But the other thing is, I noticed there's some equal fans of SQL in the chat. Like, what is everyone else using? You know, are you a SQL fan? Are you a newbie? You're learning everything from scratch. I know if I had a choice, I'd go SQL first and then look to learn the other languages depending on what I'm doing. But KQL is kind of like, I guess, the dark horse behind the scenes. KQL, Custo is sometimes what it's called, even though you're looking at that going, where do you get Custo out of KQL? But Custo is the K. With Custo, it's predominantly used for telemetry data, for real-time intelligence data, IoT, where you've got loads and loads of small data points coming through all the time in that event stream behavior, streaming in at scale, and then you're going through and you wanted to do aggregates and define queries on that data. When it comes to using it within Microsoft Fabric, it is contained, or constrained, I should say, to just the real-time intelligence experience. So you're going to be working with it in the event house /KQL database. You will also find some people say event house. An event house is like a logical container, but you're actually querying the KQL database within the event house. That KQL database is going to store all that event stream data that's coming through, and the ability to use KQL to query it, to aggregate it. Now, you can also do it for transformations, but within Fabric, you'll do it in two flavors. One, if you're doing update policies and transformations, and the other one when you're doing queries to put in dashboards and analyze some information ad hoc. But when you're actually processing an event stream, you can also go ahead and just use the UI behavior within the event stream itself. It has the ability to do transformations, aggregations, grouping, all those sort of good, wonderful things. So you don't necessarily have to write KQL. And the beauty is...
Including a SQL transformation, I might add.
Yes,
so
and the
great
thing...
spot where there's SQL, yeah.
Absolutely. And the cool thing I like is when I started working with KQL databases in Fabric, I was like, oh, KQL, I don't really know KQL. But the cool thing, you start going through the menus and you'll see that they've gone, we understand that a lot of people are probably familiar with SQL. So they put little snippets and things in SQL. So you can query with a SQL. So if you find KQL just that bridge too far at the moment, go with SQL, get familiar, and then work out how to translate your SQL query against the KQL database into a KQL query. This is an example of a KQL query. It's more of a pipeline approach. So the very first thing is that you're equivalent to your from statement in SQL. It's like, where are we starting? What object are we starting with? So we start with the security events table, and then we can do anything from adding calculated columns or conditional columns, so to speak. We can do filtering with the where clause. We can do aggregations with things like summarize. We can do sorting with order by. We can also do things like project, where we want to select only a subset of columns, or extend where we want different columns. So in this case, we can go in and go filter that security event to a specific time range. And you'll notice that ago 1 day, so it's a little bit different to where SQL does things like date diff, date add. Because it's working predominantly with time intelligence data, you can do the ago function and use that. We can filter and then we can summarize. So we're basically doing something similar to like select this, group by this, having this, but we're doing it with KQL. So, but it is very important for things like DP700 that you understand and work with the performance optimization in the order in which you do things. So you want to filter the data set to small as possible early on so that you're working with a smaller granularity of data. But the other thing with KQL is we can use it in the Azure PaaS platform too. Unmute. Hang on, Greg. Awesome content, I'm sure, but we've got to unmute you.
Oh,
there we go.
Yes. I was just throwing in, sorry, Heidi.
Go for it.
One of the nice things with a pipeline style language too is you get to see where you're up to at each step along the way. So we can do security event and then see the security events, and then we can add the where clause and then see how that's restricted. And it is beautiful, the fact you can just build up a query.
Yeah, and the great thing too is you can then pop this straight into a dashboard. So you can create a query, save it off as a query set, and then straight away have a real-time intelligence dashboard within Fabric. So you can use it straight away. You can switch and use it in Azure as well. It is purpose-built for doing analytics. It's more preferable to do it with time series data than anything else. It can work, obviously, with real-time intelligence data. We're streaming data in all the time, over and over. It's great at working with those streaming data sets. We can basically do that windowing and grouping on the fly. Things like, let's say you're in an office and you're analyzing the swipe card system for when your staff are arriving and leaving, and you want to know how many staff are in the building at any point in time for potentially your fire safety awareness. Things like that, really good for. If you're pinpointing a specific, row of data, not so much. It's not so good at doing that, not that pinpointing. But the cool thing with Fabric, KQL database, we can also tell it to store it in the one lake, and then we can link it up with other data sets as well. So even though KQL, we can use it for our real time, but if we want to then transition and use that KQL data with something else, we can. Query first, not schema first. So it's important to understand the slight differentiation there. And the other thing, and I saw it pop up on the screen before, if you're new to KQL, one of the really fun ways to learn it is go to the Custo Detective Agency. That is a gamification system of learning KQL. So they gave you little challenges. So you're basically like a detective, and you're given a data set and you're given a challenge, and you go write some KQL to figure out the answer to that question using the data set they've provided. You don't have to have anything installed to be able to do it. You don't have to have a sample data set. It's all provided for you. And you get those little badges that everyone loves that you can then share with the community and go, hey, look, I just earned Custo Detective Agency level 1, and they're always releasing more. So get on and learn that. And like everything, there's a Copilot to help you write KQL as well. So if you're not too sure about how to write that syntax, you can use the Copilot experience within Microsoft Fabric to give you a bit of a helping hand. But I know there's more languages. I mean, this next one is not really super common, I don't think, but it's quite powerful. Don't you reckon with Scala?
Yeah, indeed. It comes from, well, they say here, the big data engine room. And of course, it runs on the Java virtual machine structure and so on. It's fairly common in the Spark world. And so it mentions there it's a powerhouse for Spark. But it's a bit of a mixture of a language, actually. It has aspects of both a functional language and an object-oriented language. And so a functional language is one where you pretty much just keep describing what you're trying to achieve all the time in a sort of a pattern. And originally, the old functional languages started with things like Lisp and stuff like that. But the main thing with Scala comes more like, if you have worked with older languages in the past, this is part of, I suppose, what they'd say the Algol family. But if you've done Pascal or Modular 2 or any of those sort of languages, there's a lot of things there that are kind of familiar from that sort of background as well. And it's fairly common in around Databricks areas and Spark and so on. So just an example here. So it's got a concept of classes. And so we said, look, here's a definition of a class. And then I've built a list of orders. It's relatively straightforward to read. Then said, look, calculate a value, and this is orders. But notice the way I can just keep chaining things together. So I can say filter this amount, and then group by a region, and view, and then I can map values across and sum them, and then push that out and turn that into a map. This is very powerful, where you can just constantly chain different suffixes or clauses to the end of it to achieve the outcome. But I mean, again, Scala is not perfect. It's a strong functional programming language, no argument. It does have a powerful type system, and that's really important. If you look at different languages, there's a big difference between people who love strongly typed languages and people who like sort of loosely typed languages. And so I suppose the equivalent on that is that sometimes I really want to be sure what data types are. And in my case, I spend a lot of time doing things like data integration work and so on. And a big part of that is knowing that the data is what you expect it to be. And there's a certain beauty to being able to have data types that make sense, you know? Like I saw an example, I'll give you an example a while back of a language that I won't mention, you know, but it allowed you to do things where they said, this is really, really fast. But then I noted that, say, dates, I could have the 31st of February, and you go, hang on, that's not an actual date. But the beautiful thing I loved is that they said it's not a bug because they documented that's how it works, right? And you go, yeah, but when it's bizarre and unexpected, that's not really what you want. And then of course you get issues, you know, well, if I add a day to the 31st of February, where do I end up? And if I take a day back off, where do I now end up? And so on. So being really strong with typing is important. And it's something that SQL also does a pretty good job on, right? Is that sort of thing. But there are many other languages where everything you work with is just like a lump of data or an object. And it's only when you go to use it that you assume that it is the right type of thing. And so there's a flexibility with that, but it's not the same thing. As I said, this Scala runs on JVM, and it is actually quite commonly used in data engineering. I have a very large Scala book over there that I sort of worked through a while back, and I must admit it's one of the heaviest books that I have. So there was a lot of detail in there. And it's also, as I said, it's a bit of a mixture of a language. It's multi-paradigm. So it's sort of functional, sort of object-oriented, and you can do a bit of both. But it's also quite concise. So notice the way you could string together the commands and things. And so that ends up with you can get really tight code based on that. So weaknesses, steep learning curve. I'm not kidding here. So there is a bit to it. The way you write the code can determine a lot about how readable the code is. I'm a big fan of, if you look at maintenance of any programming language, the ability to read the code that somebody has written, or even that you wrote yourself a few months ago, makes a huge difference. And so one of the problems with languages being concise, where you can push all the things in really, really tight, is it can get, of course, harder and harder to read. And you've got to sort of sometimes fight that. I saw an example in C++ a while back where somebody had written effectively a whole encryption algorithm in a single line of code. And you go, oh my goodness, like it's like amazing they could do it, but you don't want to maintain that, right, from that point on. And so look, the compiler is kind of complex, and the error messages take a while to get used to. Because it does a lot of tricky stuff, the compile times are pretty long. And the other thing is there's not like a really simple single flavor of this. There's Scala 2 and 3 and other variations, FP heavy, we've got pragmatic options and so on. There's a lot of different forms of this language. And of course, the other thing is it's not really designed for simple CRUD systems or the sort of, the create, read, update, delete style thing. But the next one on the list is a completely different style language. So tell us about M, Heidi.
It is. But before we go into that, I saw an excellent question in the chat from Mike. I know Armando's provided his thoughts and so's Kevin, but is there anything that can't be done in PySpark where I'd need to turn to Scala, or just something that might be easier to represent? Any thoughts on that one?
I think both the languages have things that are easier to do. I would say both of them, you could probably achieve the same outcomes. Might be a bit of fun trying to do it, though.
Nothing like a challenge when working with languages, but it is a great one. But to talk about M, so M doesn't really appear in a lot of spaces within Fabric because M is for Power Query, the Power Query language. So you're going to see it in Dataflow Gen 2s, Dataflow Gen 1, because the Power BI item, but you're also going to see it in Power BI Desktop when you hit the advanced editor. That's where you're going to see M. So predominantly when people work with it, it is very much a step series language, and you're going to work with it in the GUI, and behind the scenes, Fabric and Power BI are going to translate that into the M language for you. It's not as common to be able to sit there and write M from scratch. You can, of course, because if you've ever worked with the Dataflow Gen 2s, Gen 1s, you can go in and say, I just want a blank script, and then that's you writing M in. But where I like to use M when it comes to Power Query and Power BI is to actually do some steps and then go into the advanced editor and actually see what those steps translate to in the M language. Because more often than not, I need to say replace a data source from one connection to another, but in a different Power BI file. So I can just open that advanced editor, see the M code, and then switch that over. But you can't just copy paste blindly. You need to understand what that M is doing. So often it's good to be able to do some steps, switch to the advanced editor, see what that translates to in that query language. And of course, make sure your queries are folding back where query folding is applicable. And on that note, there is the 30 days of folding challenges where you can go through and try and understand how to write Power Query steps so that they always fold as much as possible. And that's because you want the translations and everything to occur on the data source, as far close to the source as possible. Less work for the mashup engines to be doing on the Fabric Power BI side. It is a declarative language, so it is one of those sort of strongly typed ones, but it's also a bit messy when you're dealing with it. And it's great for transforming and cleaning up that code. So if we go ahead and look at what M looks like behind the scenes, in this one, So you start off with the let statement. It's kind of like saying, this is my starting point language, let, and then I'm going to tell you what to do as a series of steps. And each step has a connection to the next step. So in this case, we're saying we've got basically a variable t, and that's going to represent, I want to say hard-coded, but an enter data table. So when you select enter data, this is what it's going to translate to. So we would have done a 2-table column, 1 column region, 1 column amount with things like APAC 120, EMEA 75, so on and so forth. And then that's going to be represented as a table within the M language there. Then for the next step, we're calling it R, but R will take in T as its feed in. So there's always a connectivity between the next step to the previous step. So now we can say, well, they're going to run the group by command on the table. What table are we using? The T table, but we don't want all of them. We want to select only the rows where the amount column is greater than 100, greater than or equal to, I should say, 100. And then we also want to include the region. What do we want to do? Part of that group by, define a total. What's the total calculation? We're going to look at each one and sum the amount, and we want the amount to be represented as a number. So in the M language, not only can you do cleaning up of your data in terms of find and replace style of things, where you go, instead of this value, I want this value, but also data type conversion. So we can say we want this column and the data type that we want it to be. And the end result, we then say, now that we've run all our different steps, then in is basically like saying output. What do you want me to send back? So output R. So the resulting set of R, the data set that it creates, is then going to be what translates back. So this M code, and I saw some conversations in the chat, should you do the code, should you do the GUI? I think you're always going to start with the GUI predominantly, unless you're doing really advanced stuff where the only option is to start from a blank script and do M, or you're going to leverage an existing community sourced solution or a template within your org. But otherwise, you're probably going to start with the UI. But it's important to understand the M behind the scenes, A, so you've got good chance with DP 700. But also B, if you need to translate something and put it into another Power Query and you're not quite sure where it came from, because you can see all the steps, but often it'll just have a generic name like group by. And then you've got to go in and see what that does. Sometimes the UI doesn't give you all the ability to explain the steps in great detail, enough that you can recreate it on another solution. So sometimes it's good to be able to just go into the M and go, okay, in this particular data flow, we did this. I need to do that for these other 10 data flows. This is the M query to do it. Now I'll go and retrofit that into the other 10. Great when you're working with it in bulk. And the other fun thing, Power Query, if you're working with Dataflow Gen 1 or Gen 2, you can export them as JSON, load them up in your favorite coding editor, my personal favorite, Visual Studio Code, crack open GitHub Copilot and have it help you work with the M as well. So that's another way we can use M. So I think both, your personal preference. Some people love to go pro code and work with the M in the advanced editor. Some people prefer to do the UI. If you're going to use the Copilot experience within Fabric, it's going to be the UI generating the Power Query steps for you. But you can always do the advanced editor and look at it that way.
One of the things I love there too, Heidi, is that there are some things I can do in the advanced editor, like loops and things that there's just no UI support for. I think that's really powerful. I'd love to hear from anybody in the chat just, what are the reasons that cause you to dive into the advanced editor if you do that? And one other thing I'd throw in here too is just, we talked about strong and loosely typing before. So you have a look at that code and tell me what data type the amounts are, right?
Yeah.
And so this is an example. We've just used numbers here and we've compared it to numbers and so on. We haven't said what data type any of those things are, right? So this is more of an example of somewhat more loose typing. But tell us about the strengths and weaknesses.
Well, and I know there's some conversations in the chat around like performance and CU usage. Obviously, Dataflow Gen 2 has a better performance over Dataflow Gen 1. So if you're starting now and you have Fabric, consider going for Gen 2 and steer clear of Gen 1. But if you're working with only Power BI items, Gen 1 is still a possibility in that space. And you're absolutely right, Mike. Sometimes the GUI doesn't necessarily lead to good design, but the GUI is an option. And for people who aren't pro code developers, it's a great way to get started and get familiar. And then if you want to transition to a pro code experience, you can, but you can also stay in a low code. And no tool is going to tell you good design. Good design is something you've got to learn over time, and good design for one organization may be different for the next one. So don't like carte blanche cookie cutter copy it as a template and use it everywhere. You've got to work with, okay, what's the data set we've got, what's the solution we're trying to build, and then design appropriately for your outcome. So like everything, there's multiple ways to do the same outcome in Fabric, so it's important to learn that process and practices. But strengths and weaknesses, it is built purposefully from a functional standpoint and immutable. It is declarative. So you saw there we had the let, we have each row is basically a different set of commands attached to a variable, and then an output statement with the in. Great for semi-structured data. Can also be good for things like expanding out JSON and XML value types as well. It is so closely coupled with Microsoft languages. So this is not one you're going to see in any other product on the market. It's not a general purpose language. It can be very tricky to optimize. It can also be a bit troublesome because you're working with the UI within Fabric. For this one, you don't really do an offline edit on it. So sometimes you've got to wait for all the steps to preview before you can save and close out and have it functional. So there is that very big limitation, I would say, on the debugging experience, but that's where being able to read the M code can help you, because you can do sort of a theoretical debug without having the real live data being visible. It's hard to version and test. Yep, it's stored in a JSON file, but that's as good as you can get. Put it in source control. If it's Gen 2, if Gen 1, you're on your own. You got to hit the export button and put it in source control sort of manually. And the skill transfer is narrow because it is quite a niche space. So I think having an awareness of it is probably the level that I'd go to, whereas your Pythons, your Scalas, your SQL, you'll probably go more in-depth on those ones. But I know we've got another competitor for the superpower coming up, which is the Python one, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. This one has become the real workhorse of many parts of the industry over recent times. A lot of the work that you'll see where people are coming from the sort of lakehouse style areas, or if you just need to bring up sort of basic programs to do almost anything, Python's really become one of the common ways that people do this. It's another one that comes from that, I mentioned, like the Algol family of things, and modular and Pascal and all those. Python has got a lot of the characteristics of that sort of thing. It's probably one of the real strengths of it is it has a massive ecosystem that's mentioned there. So with Python, one of the real advantages is you often don't know, or you don't need to know, how to do a wide variety of things to be able to do some really complex outcomes. So there are libraries in there that achieve amazing outcomes. And so everything from manipulation of like frames of data through calling AI systems or doing machine learning or various types of data science and so on, there's just really, really strong story in Python. I should add that in SQL Server, there's some level of support for Python, even inside the server as well. Now, just an example, the Python code is pretty readable stuff. And so note here, I've just said like orders is an array. In this case, notice the square brackets. And then I've just listed the entries that are inside that. And each one of those is an object effectively. And notice it's got the squiggly brackets around those. And we've just defined those on the fly. And then we can say, look, total by region. And I've said, look, go through each of the orders. And then if the order amount's bigger than 100, then we're going to change the region. And then we're going to do totaling and so on. It's a very procedural language where you can sort of just step through and you get to see step by step what's going on. But there's a real power in Python. And as I said, if you see people working in data science and machine learning and areas like that, they're all over it. But nowadays, it's also super common in notebooks for doing data manipulation, including in areas like Fabric. So one of the most common things you'll see in a Fabric notebook is chunks of Python code. It's very strong in terms of its ability to do different things, simply because there are so many libraries that make it easy to do things. And so strengths-wise, it's very approachable. Again, it's one of these languages where you can write a few lines of code and have it do things straight away, or even one line of code and get it to do things. Where I've worked with languages many, many years ago where you had to write almost like pages of boilerplate stuff just to get anything to work, you know. So this is really quick to get started with. As I said, the ecosystem's huge. It's a very productive language. It's multi-paradigm in that it does have concepts of object orientation as well as normal procedural languages. The tooling is good for data work, and it just runs everywhere. There are Python implementations all over the place. So weaknesses-wise, the runtime can be slow. So this is one of the challenges where you have large amounts of things. It's a bit like when we were talking about M a minute ago. You need to choose the areas where it makes sense and where it doesn't. So like, for example, in M, I noted where Heidi was saying about talking about the performance things and so on. One example is that there's some languages do a good job of multi-threading. Some do, they're stuck in a sort of single-threaded mode. And so if you use, for example, in M, operations like distinct, you suddenly make the whole thing be single-threaded, and that sort of stuff is going to sort of slow you down. Where one of the beautiful things, voting for my SQL fans, is that, you know, the SQL language, the optimizers and things for that do an amazing job of dealing with concurrency and so on. Where, again, concurrency here is one of the limitations in Python. Managing dependencies and environment is improving, but it is a challenge. One of the issues you have when you have the ability to use a whole lot of libraries that come from all over the place is that, keep in mind, those libraries keep changing as well. And so you need to think about, you know, if I open up my program and I bring in new versions of the libraries, what effect does that have on the code that I'm already trying to build? And I've had scenarios with some languages where I open a project up and it takes me hours to get back to where I was 3 months ago. And it's just because all the dependencies have changed. A big one with Python is the code quality varies. There's a lot of people who write Python code who don't have any sort of formal background in doing software. That's probably the nice way to say it. And or maybe commercial background is the word I'm really more looking for. The main thing is that they end up writing code that really isn't production or commercial ready. And so you have to be wary. But it is fabulous that they can get started building things. And so the list here, they say, look, not a strong choice for long-lived, high throughput services for that reason. But still, I cannot overstate how important Python is now as one of the general purpose languages. But the next one is, again, another very specific one with DAX.
Indeed it is. And I remember years ago, early on in my career, I was like, oh, Python's for web devs. They use it for testing. Now it's like, hang on, any lake architecture we've got in the data world is basically Python.
It's
and
everywhere.
I had another team. Yeah. And I had a team go, oh, we're sort of afraid to use Fabric because we've got to learn Python. I said, no, you can use SQL in Fabric. And I know Armando's put it out in the chat. The beauty of Fabric is you get all these languages you can use against the same data. So you can choose which one you want. That's both a good thing because you can choose one. Bad thing, which one do you choose for when, and do you allow everyone to use everything? But we got options. But into the DAX. So DAX is specifically to Power BI only. It is purely Power BI reports. So when you're working with the modeling behind a Power BI report, so you've got that semantic model data set, as it used to be called, sometimes in the audit logs it appears as data set, where we're doing things like calculated columns, measures. The really challenging thing with DAX is it's context aware. So when you write the DAX, you might write, hey, I want to take this column and calculate a sum on this other column. Now that's what you define as the DAX query, But what it's actually then doing is going, oh, okay, what is the filter context? Are there any slices being used on this report that I need to take into account as my filter context? Is there a row context I need to be aware of? I've got row level security on. The user can only see this particular set of rows. Are there column contexts as well? So it's kind of like 3D thinking almost when you're working with DAX, because you're defining it in one way, but its actual, output result set is taking into account all the things around it in the context. So that can become very, very confusing, and visual calcs in Power BI helps with that understanding in a visual way. But if we look at a DAX query here, so we always start with, what are we defining? Where are we storing this? What is it? So we have total sales, treat it like a variable parameter, if you will. And then what are we doing in that space? We're going to calculate. Calculate is very much used when you want to do a computation, a calculation. You've got things like summarize, calculate, and a few others. But in his case, we want to sum the sales amount field. So we want to get a total for sales amount, but we only want to do that where the sales amount is greater than or equal to 100. So now that's what we define as our measure for total sales. When we actually go use it in a visual, it's going to take into account the context around that visual. Then for sales by region, similar thing. So we can do a summation, sum X, and say sum X, but we want to apply a filter. So earlier it kind of like did a where clause where we said sales amount greater than or equal to 100. In this case, we want to pre-filter the table first. We want to filter the sales amount to greater than or equal to 100 and get the sales amount value back. And then we want to sum that value. So they're kind of like same, but different in the way that they do it. And with DAX, it is for analytics only. So we're in, the semantic model. Context aware, as we talked about, can be highly expressive when you're writing business logic, and you can do variables and reuse values. So you can have a DAX expression, calculate one value, and then reuse that value throughout another DAX expression to return back. Of course, we're using the columnar engine behind the scenes. Think Vertipack. It's declarative. It's tight integration to Power BI. You're not going to see this in other platforms and other languages, but you can use things like Copilot and that to help you write it. There's not really a visual drag and drop, but we've got external tools like DAX Studio written by Darren Gospel that can help you write DAX, understand DAX, and also look at the performance. When you got high cardinality, are you doing the right DAX query for the outcome you want? Sometimes you'll get the dreaded error message of there's too much data to work with. It's not because there's too much data. You just need to structure your DAX slightly differently to get the outcome. Steep learning curve, absolutely, because it is that 3D thinking. Think about row context, think about column context, think about filter context. Readability can be a challenge, but we've got some tools to help us there in the Copilot space. Grab some DAX, put it in things like Edge browser, Copilot, drop it in and say explain. It can understand it because the language is defined on the docs arena. Model dependent behavior, not really reusable because it's only in Power BI. You can reuse it by scripting out the DAX and putting, let's say you wanted to do time series intelligence and you're going to repeat the same calculation across multiple models that you have. Sure, you can copy the code, reuse it in other platforms, but not really in any other way. But that is well into it. I'm sure there's been some polls. So I hope you've been voting for which one is your favorite language. And don't worry, you're probably like me and Greg. There's not one favorite. We use the right one for the right time, but we like them all. Now, computers can do amazing things, right? So, without programming languages just telling the computer what to do. So the fact that we can use all these languages to get it to do all these different things, and the beauty of it, we can use them all within Fabric on the same data. We're not copying all the data around. We can use all these languages and figure out which one lets us do the best thing. But there's some similarities that we saw with some of those, like we talked about looping earlier, Greg.
Indeed. Look, I suppose with any languages, one of the beauties of getting used to a few different programming languages is that, or development languages, that every time you then strike another one, you already know the sort of things that you're going to go looking for. So they're generally here mentioned, there's core logic. Most languages have variables, they have loops, conditions, functions, data structures. The question, though, is does it make sense to use them? So, for example, in SQL, every time I see myself writing a loop, I think, should I be doing this? And so on. So it's not always a case of, can the language do it? But the thing is, does it make sense to do it? The most important thing is that the mission that you're trying to achieve is the thing that should drive the choice you make of the language. So these are not all interchangeable languages. They all have special capabilities and live in special parts of the ecosystem. And that's great. But look, knowing different languages is actually a superpower. So if you use the right tool for the job, you get to the right outcome much faster. And that's where you want to be. But Heidi, tell us about where AI fits in this.
AI, all the things, man. We would be mistaken if we didn't mention AI. And by the way, I heard Python won the poll. Python won the poll.
Cool.
We've got a lot of Python people behind the scenes. But now, when we talk about AI, of course, there's, generative AI, agentic AI, Copilot AI, ChatGPT AI, all things AI, right? The great thing when we're talking about AI and how we can use it, now you don't have to. If you're in an organization that doesn't use it, you don't have to. I like to see with customers, they love using it for the gold-plated, the latest and greatest, but I love seeing it in productivity improvement and helping you get through those procrastination barriers. We know how to write Python. Sometimes we forget exactly what we've got to write. We're not sure how to set up the data frame. You can use AI to help you you explain to it what you're trying to achieve with the data set and have it do that model creation. Or if we're writing SQL, we can get it to explain the SQL, but we can also get it to help us write better SQL. If we're trying to write, sometimes people struggle with windowing functions. So you can use it for that. DAX, auto measures. Who likes to write the same measures over and over and over? You calculate sum by year, year on year, by month. Oh, I got to do it again for FTE count. I forgot. Mate, AI, that stuff. Auto create it. AI and M. You're not sure how to write a transformation. You know what outcome you want to achieve. You need a bit of assistance. That's where you go for AI there. It is our Copilot. Now, it is our coding Copilot. It is not autopilot. You don't set and forget. You actually have to give it a bit of training. Treat it like a junior developer. You got a co-worker helping you with the workload. It's going to sit there. Now, I know Pam threw this in. You probably a few of you might be rolling your eyes, but this is a great one. AI is becoming your coding Copilot. It's there to help you. It's not there to do everything for you. So it's not going to replace you entirely. But the latest twist is how you hear about AI and coding together.
Yeah, look, one of the terms that you'll start to hear quite a bit now is vibe coding. And of course, this is changing the way how a lot of people do development. And so the thinking is that you should, when you're working with strong AI tools, you should be able to get to the point of describing what you want, letting the AI system draft it. And then the bit I love here they mention is refining together. The thing that I find when I do this work, I don't know if it's different for you, Heidi, but I find that I feel like I'm a manager when I'm working with someone who really is maybe a bit entry level, and importantly, they are people who don't necessarily remember the same thing every time they do something, and so it really changes the way you do coding. So you end up going from being focused on the syntax to being focused on the outcome. So what I find when I'm doing this style of coding, which is really powerful, and I do love doing it, particularly for things like, operating system tools or utilities, or, I need to take a folder of videos and I want to capture, a screenshot out of every video in that folder with a certain file type where the output folder doesn't already exist and so on. I can describe that to the AI system and it'll write what it thinks is going to be appropriate. And then it's a case of you just keep working with it until you get to the point that it does achieve the outcome you're looking for. And so it's always a bit of a balance where you think maybe an experienced person, if you just started from scratch, might get to the end faster. But it's lowering the level of the person who needs to be able to do that work to not need to know the syntax anymore, but they need to work out how to keep talking to the AI system to be very specific about what you're trying to achieve. And one of the little hints I'll give you along the way too is that most of the AI tools that I work with are designed to be overly positive, right? So they'll always tell you that things are great, or you've done a wonderful thing, and so on and whatever. One of the things you can do with these sort of tools is tell them to be more matter of fact, and don't go gaslighting me, sort of thing. And so you can control how the tool interacts with you. I mean, there's obviously other things you can do, like I could tell it to always talk to me like a Midwestern cowboy if I wanted, and it will do that. But the thing is, in terms of coding, I really want it to be very straightforward with me, and so if it doesn't know something, I want it to tell me it doesn't know it, rather than have it guess, right? Or if, all these sort of things, I want it to be very, very straightforward with me. But anyway, as I said, there is a bit of a skill to learning to effectively manage the AI tool when you're doing this style of coding. And most people will have had that experience if they've tried it. But anyway, so tell us more about day-to-days again here, Heidi.
Yeah, no, I love the vibe coding. Sometimes I like to do it with a bit of Yoda theme. But also, yeah, I watch it. I love setting it off in the background as if I'm delegating a task. I delegate to my VS Code GitHub Copilot and say, off you go, work on this. But I've got to check in on it, because if it starts going off on a random tangent and the wrong way, I'm like, no, stop, that wasn't right. And I love when you tell it, it's very confident. It goes, this is the answer. And I go, no, that's wrong. I need you to interpret this bit of code this way. And it goes, oh, yes, you're right. And continues
You're right.
on. But this is the Fabric Data Days monthly series, not to be confused with sort of the more weekly series that we also have on offer. It is available on the Reactor YouTube channel. You can go rewatch the sessions if you missed any. Put forward your feedback. If there's some specific content you'd love to have covered in these, we're running them monthly. So just reach out to the team. I know the feedback links have been in the chat there, so you can message through and give us your feedback and join up. That Fabric user panel, oh my God, that's like, turn the fire hose on of information and access and conversations, because when you sign up for this, you're signing up and you're getting access and you're talking to the people working on the products and getting your opinions through. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to potentially change the product to exactly how you want, but if you don't put your hat in the ring, you got no chance, really. So it's important to provide that feedback, give it that two-way street. We want better products for everyone, and if they don't know what you're trying to do with the product, how can they make it achievable? The other thing, we got 600 and 700. Please sign up. Scan that QR code, give it a go. The worst that happens, you fail it, or you have issues getting into the exam in the first place. But once you've given it a go, you'll have an idea of what that exam's about. And heck, you get instantaneous gratification or instantaneous results either way. And if you didn't go so well, you can retry later. You can't retry on the same voucher code, but it's not like you fail and you can't do it again. So you can go through the exam process, give yourself the best possible chance. If you fail, you go, okay, now I know where I struggled. I might need to spend some more time on KQL or spend some more time on optimization and monitoring. So it's important to give these things a go. I know I went from like no exams to about 13 certifications in a couple of years, and those vouchers were the thing that got me to do it, because I went, whoa, this is expensive to do these exams. And then I went, not when you have a voucher, it's not. But of course, FabCon, come join us in person. I know that it's not possible for everyone to come join us, but if you get the chance, if you got the opportunity, please sign up. There's still time to sign up. March 16 through 20 US time. So for those of you in APAC, over in New Zealand, Australia, and a few other countries, and you're a day ahead, just calculate the adjustment, because it'll be Monday through Friday in Atlanta, Georgia. And I look forward to seeing some of you. Come say hi.
And finally, we need to thank our moderators. So Armando and Kevin, thank you so much for being involved in the chat. Thank you all for taking part with our session today. And we'll see you again another day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. And also thanks to Pam and Anna. Bye.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. This session is a part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you at the next one.